what you will about the things in your past. Pick up the pieces off the floor. You'll see the roses scattered in all of that glass. You'll see it leads to something more. I know the road is hard. I know the world is falling apart. I know the edges are sharp. Right to your heart, right to your heart. But this is just the start. This is just the start. Day after day you keep on moving somehow. Night after night you sleep it off. This kind of battle wants to harden you now. The real fight is trying to stay soft. 'Cause oh, the road is hard. And oh, the world is falling apart. Oh, the edges are sharp. Right to your heart, right to your heart. But this is just the start. And in the dark, you'll find a it's hard. And oh, the world's just falling apart. I know the edges are sharp. Right to your heart, right to your heart. Right to your heart, right to your heart. Right to your heart, right to your heart. But this is just the start. This is just the start. This is just the start.
Okay, and here we are. I haven't said it yet, but again, thanks to Juliana Finch for letting me use her wonderful music. JulianaFinch.com. Available Bandcamp, Spotify, Amazon Music. Sorry, Amazon Music doesn't exist anymore, does it? Apple Music. And find local concerts everywhere. Okay, so where are we at? It's in. I'm very puzzled at this point because, like, it's saying that we're 70% through this book. From what I remember of the last scene, I don't know how there's 30% of the book left. um, so I'm wondering if what I remembered as like the closing scene wasn't actually the closing scene at all, or if there's just quite a lot more going on. So catching up, both Ginny and Jan were abducted, and well, one was abducted, one was Jan volunteered himself to be a hostage exchange, but that went as badly as really everyone expected. Ginny managed, once Ginny found out Jan was there, she got Jan out. Together they escaped, and then and from there they Jan damaged the helicopter and the truck, so they at the very least couldn't leave right away. Then he teleported back, got a transmitter, teleported back to the house, prison, sanitarium, evil Eastern Bloc lair. We are dealing with some wonderfully cliche and offensive imagery about just what the villains are. So that's fun. There's also so they escaped. They were about to put Jan in the mind wipe machine, and he revealed his power to freeze people. When they were about to inject him, the fear just got too much and it overwhelmed him, and he just unleashed this fury of energy and activity, and ended up smashing the machine, hurting the doctor, hurting Big Doc. Shouldn't call him a doctor. And at the taking out everyone but Helga, who Helga used judo and some nerve pressure points to knock him out. And that's where we left, in with everything fading to black. Think that's caught up here. Catching everyone up on why I'm even doing this is this book just popped into my mind last week, and in the sense of I vaguely remember it. I remember it being one of my favorite books. I don't remember anything about it. I was able to, with some help in some discords, eventually get the title of it, and I thought it would be interesting to explore reading it again for the first time, and also just practice doing some voices, practice after everything that's been going on, just practice talking for a bit. After this longest march ever. Just kind of getting back into a flow of interacting and communicating, even if it's interacting with all of you. And Let's get into Chapter 13, Escape. Jan awoke slowly in what he thought was at first a darkened room. Then gradually he came to realize that the room was moving and he was not alone in it. "Jan," came Jenny's whisper, Are you all right?" He started to sit up, but the room lurched and threw him to one side. He decided it was better to lie on his back, a position that made him less aware of his aches. Every part of him, including his head, seemed to ache, and the ringing was still in his ears. "I think I'm all right," he managed finally. Where are we?" "In the van." "Oh." He started to ask where they were going, and at the same time he wondered why it was so dark, but she picked both questions from his mind before he could voice the first one. "We're going to Jenna's," she said, "wherever that is. But it can't be far away. Jenna seemed to be a sort of go-between. I mean, all calls come through her place, and she makes arrangements and things. And the van's dark because that toughie of a Helga fastened a piece of cardboard over the grill, so we can't see out." Ginny's whisper sank lower as she added, "I can think of only one reason why she'd do that. I did catch her wondering about it. She's afraid I'm a telepath and might tell somebody where we are." "Oh." He thought about Helga for a moment and asked, What did she do to me?" "She put you out with a judo trick. She's an expert. But she's afraid of you now. They're all afraid of you." "Huh? Afraid of me? Why?" Because of what you can do." Jenny was silent for a moment, then said, "Jan, I never dreamed anyone could put up such a fight. But it wasn't anything to what you did at the last." He sighed. "Whatever I did sure wasn't good enough. They won't fry our brains in Matilda, at least not in that one. But they still got us." Again she was silent for a moment, then, "Jan, don't you realize what you're able to do?" "You mean about stopping the hypo?" "Jan, you not only... Jan," she said slowly, "you not only stopped the hypo, but you blew it up and stopped Helga." "Huh? Well, I suppose I did bust the thing, but it was just an accident. I mean, I was so fired up and mad, it would have been a wonder if the thing hadn't broken." "It didn't just break, or even explode, really. It suddenly disintegrated. I mean, you destroyed it, just the way Pops destroyed that other one when those men came for you the first time. Only you did more than Pops did. You stopped Helga. She couldn't move. I was watching. Jan, if you had been looking at her instead of the hypo, and all that force had gone into her... Good grief." He was shocked. It was a profound shock that held him silent for long seconds, while the van made uneasy progress along a bumpy and very winding road. "Why," he asked miserably, "why did I have to be born with something like that to worry about?" "That's no good way to look at it," she said quickly. "My goodness, if Pops learned to live with it, so can you. Just be thankful you have it, especially now. Don't you see? If you use it right, it ought to help us get away from these awful people." Oh. He hadn't thought of it that way. though at the moment it didn't seem possible that he could ever find the strength to call upon that power again. He was so tired. He was hungry, too, but mainly he was used up. He was so used up he knew he only had to close his eyes and he would fall instantly to sleep here in the jolting van. Then it occurred to him that everyone else, from Big Doc to Ginny, must feel much the same way. "Yes," said Ginny, answering his thoughts. "They do. Only I'm so on edge I couldn't sleep now if I tried. Though I know I must if I have the chance. But Big Doc's ready to collapse, so is Helga. You've wrecked all their plans. They've got to get us out of the country fast, but there's no way they can do it till tonight. I don't know how they plan to do it. That seems to be mostly Jenna's problem. In the meantime, all they can do is hide us and hole us up somewhere themselves." "What about Otis? Are you able to get through to him?" "Not since you got back. He must have fallen asleep. After all, he's been up all night too, and he's only 5. Her small hand found his in the dark and clung to it. "Jan, I can't help being scared, but it's not half as bad as it would be if I were alone. As long as you're with me, I sort of feel we got a chance. In spite of what happened to the transmitters. I mean, we're really a pair of dillies with what the two of us can do. It's a stalemate now, but we'll beat them yet," he said, trying to put more confidence in the words than he felt. Then he added, "If they're afraid of me, I wonder why they didn't tie me up or something." "I'm sure it's just because they don't quite realize how dangerous you can be. It just hasn't hit them yet. I'm sure it will later when they've rested and have more time to think about it, but right now it gives us an edge. Jan?" "Yes?" "I've got an idea. When they stop and take us out, and I think they're turning in at Jenna's now, act real beat. I mean, you were unconscious when they put us in here, so be real dazed when they haul us out." "I get you. Hey, what's this under my foot? I keep feeling something." It's the hatchet," she whispered. "I put it in the corner when you left, and they didn't notice it when they found me. Give it to me." He reached forth in the dark, and she placed the handle of it in his hand. What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know yet." The van was slowing. Quickly he slid the hatchet's handle down his jeans, leaving the blade to protrude above his belt buckle. After giving his shirt a twitch to partially cover the blade, he buttoned his jacket over it. It was going to be pretty awkward, but he figured if he kept his hand on his stomach and walked with a stoop, he might get away with it. Just what he was going to do with the hatchet, he hadn't the slightest idea, though the van stopped. Though as the van stopped, it suddenly occurred to him that might be a good tool for prying open a locked door. Anyway, it was a weapon. Somehow he had vastly more confidence in it than in a curious and highly unpleasant... okay, sorry. Anyway, it was a weapon, and somehow he had vastly more confidence in it than in a curious and highly unpleasant possession that Heron Rhodes probably would call the evil eye, which couldn't chop through or pry open anything. He says, completely missing the fact that he disintegrated a needle, therefore could maybe disintegrate other things. He heard the front doors of the van being opened and slammed closed as people got out. Other doors opened and closed. There were footsteps and a mutter of voices coming closer. Quick, questioning, even angry voices. No one here seemed very happy about what was going on. A woman said, "Leopold, what happened to you?" He recognized Big Doc's soft muttered growl, and Helga snapped. That boy tried to kill him with a poker. He's a devil. Now those rooms. There's just one room, Helga, I told you, but it's safe. We covered the window. Very well. Put them together. It's only till tonight, that is, if you can get that rig. We've got it, but it'll be after 9 before it's serviced and ready. Here, take one of the sacks. You better handle the boy. George, open the door. The rear door of the van was unlocked and cautiously opened. Jan lowered his head as a light flashed in his face. Someone caught his legs, and he was hauled out into the dimness of a closed garage. He caught a brief glimpse of Big Doc with a bandage on the side of his face. Then abruptly Helga put a cloth sack over his head. Almost in the same motion she caught his right hand, gave it a quick twist behind his back, and propelled him forward. He groaned and stumbled, clutching his stomach. What's the matter with you? She demanded. I hurt. You'll hurt a great deal more if you attempt any tricks. Straight ahead. Easy. Up a step. Up another. Turn as I guide you. The sack over his head seemed a silly precaution, unless they become afraid of his curious power. Yet by the time he made several turns, he'd lost all sense of direction, and was beginning to wonder if she didn't suspect them both of being telepathic. If Big Doc and company had been truly smart, he thought, they would have knocked us both out with hypos while I was unconscious. That way we wouldn't have any idea of where we were or how far we'd come. Then he thought, no, they're saving the hypos till later, so we won't be able to tell anyone what kind of rig they're using to take us away. Rig? Did that mean another helicopter or something else? In spite of Helga's urging, he forced himself to move slowly and occasionally stumble as if in weakness. He was almost afraid to even think of the hatchet, though he was careful to keep his hand over the blade, pressing it against him so that the weight of it might not be too much for his belt. He was vastly relieved when he and Ginny were thrust through a doorway, and he heard someone close and lock the door behind them. On the other side of the door, a woman said in a disgruntled voice, There's food for you on the table. Make it last, for that's all you get while you're here. Jan pulled the sack from his head and glanced at Ginny, who had done the same. She wrinkled her nose at the door, then tossed the sack aside with a wry little smile. It gave him the feeling that the sack had no more effect upon her vision than the darkness. The room, he saw at a quick glance, was hardly larger than his earlier prison. There was a cot on one side, a chair and a card table against one wall, and a sleeping bag on the floor on the other side. A door on the left opened into a tiny lavatory containing a washbowl and a toilet. On the card table there was a plate of sandwiches, 2 glasses, and a small pitcher of what seemed to be orange juice. Above it, covering what was obviously a window, was a nailed 3-foot square of plywood. A small fixture in the high ceiling gave the place an unpleasantly weak illumination, which somehow reminded him of a storage area near an old hotel. Near it, air hissed downward from a circular vent. Jan looked thoughtfully at the plywood over the window, then glanced at the door. Seeing no peephole, he listened until the footsteps in the hall faded away, and quickly drew the hatchet from his belt and slipped it under the sleeping bag. Ginny had gone to the card table and was testing a sandwich while she filled the glasses from the pitcher. They're all cheese, she announced unhappily, but I intend to eat 2 of them anyway. They'll help me go to sleep, and I've got to sleep. Anyway, I'm so hungry I could eat snails. Snails are good, he said absently, frowning again at the plywood over the window, then reaching eagerly for one of the sandwiches. My father loved them. She sipped some of the orange juice and asked quietly, Jan, what was your father's name? Raoul, he said, and began cramming the sandwich into his mouth. He gulped it down and reached for another and mumbled, You take the cot. He managed the second sandwich, drank some orange juice, and slumped into the sleeping bag. There was something he wanted to tell her, but it slipped from him as he closed his eyes. He was drawn forcibly out of a frightening dream by Ginny shaking him awake. Since the dream, as nearly always of late, had to do with the blackness and Big Doc, it was no great relief to be suddenly faced with the unpleasant fact that he and Ginny were still Big Doc's prisoners. "Sure wish we had a watch," he muttered, sitting up and rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "If I just knew the time." "It's a little after 4 in the afternoon," she told him. "We've slept for about 10 hours. How do you feel?" "A lot better than I did." How do you know the time?" "Otis is back in business." Her small face was pinched, and she was as serious as he'd ever seen her. "Go wash your face and freshen up. We've some things to talk over." He hurried into the washroom. Coming out, he poured the rest of the orange juice into their glasses and sat down facing her on the sleeping bag. She took her glass, but set it down without touching the juice. She looked like she was ready to cry, but didn't. She chewed on her lip a moment and rubbed a freckle on her cheek that she always rubbed when thinking hard. "Jan," she began suddenly, "we better forget about Bill and Mr. Martin. There's no way they can help us. Otis told me Bill picked up the transmission signal on the direction finder, but lost it before they could get it working properly. It didn't point anywhere near the Glen Springs area, as they thought it would. So that's out. Pop's got them a small plane right away, and they tried for hours to locate the old house where we were, but without a big helicopter in the backyard, they couldn't." Clausen managed to take it away?" "Yes, it left when we started over here in the van. Anyway, they can't even guess where we are now. Of course, Pops and Aunt Heck are cruising around all the back roads with Otis, hoping he can get some sort of range of us, but..." "Otis found me," he reminded her. "But that was easy, Jan. We only had a few miles to search in. This is different. It's easy to figure out, though I'm no good at math. If we're only 10 or 12 miles from them, double the radius and that gives one side of a square. That works out to 400 square miles. But she's no good at math. "How long do you think it would take poor Otis to... Hey, wait a minute," he said quickly, sliding over and putting his arm around her. Somehow he knew he'd never thought of putting his arm around any girl before, but this was different. Ginny was like a sister, only more so. They were like a team, and she'd become the most important person in the world to him. "Now look," he hastened. "I'm not depending on Otis or Nat Martin or anyone to get us out of this. We're going to do it ourselves. If anyone tries to stop us, they'll get a taste of this." He reached under the sleeping bag and drew out the hatchet. "It ought to open the door for us. If it won't, maybe he'll pry off that plywood so we can get out the window." Impulsively, she kissed him on the cheek, then smiled. "I'm awfully glad we met on the train that day." "Me too," he said earnestly, and hugged her. "Now look, we've got to figure out a couple of things. First, did you get any idea what part of the house we're in?" She nodded. "That sack didn't stop me. It just made things a little fuzzy. It's a big, long house, but not nearly old as the other, and I think we're in a wing on the side of a hill. Or maybe it's just a steep slope. All I got was a glimpse of the porch at the end of a hall. Anyway, I hope you can open the door, because I have a feeling it's an awful long drop from that window to the ground." "Have you heard anyone moving around the house? Or out in the hall?" "Yes, there's a room close to us. Maybe it's across the hall, where I've heard people go in and out several times since I've been awake. One of them, I think it was a man, went out a little while ago and drove off. But that leaves 2 people in the room. Oh dear, they must be the ones left to guard us." Sure, they wouldn't leave us unguarded now. Frowning, no longer confident as he had been, he got up and went to the door and put his ear to it. As he did so, a telephone rang and he heard a woman answer it. When she hung up, a man said something in a low voice, but he was unable to make out any of their conversation. Remembering the turns, he guessed the man and the woman were across the hall in a corner room, where they could watch the door here. He stepped back from the door and studied it the way it fitted into the frame, then very carefully tried the knob to find out how loose it was. Finally, he tried wedging the hatchet blade between the door and the frame and pressing it sideways. It was immediately obvious that he would be unable to budge the door without making so much noise that it would be heard all over the house. Lips compressed, he turned away from it and went to the window. His spirits rose a little when he discovered a lower corner where the square of the plywood, slightly warped, did not fit tightly against the wood beneath it. The hatchet blade went underneath it easily. A slow, careful twist of the handle widened the space. He pushed the blade higher. He pushed the blade higher and again twisted the handle. A nail squeaked. It sounded so loud he was sure it must have been heard across the hall. In his sudden nervousness, he almost dropped the hatchet. He stopped and went to the door and listened. Hearing nothing alarming, he hurried back and was gratified to see the corner of the plywood had been lifted a full inch from the window. After that, he proceeded slowly, using the hatchet with greater care. When the lower edge of the square had been loosened, he was surprised at the ease with which the sides came free. He had to stand on the chair to get the upper corners, and now discovered that the top of the plywood had not been nailed. His small delight was almost immediately cut short by the sudden arrival of a car somewhere outside, and he heard quick footsteps entering the house. Ginny whispered in alarm, "I think that's Helga. She must be coming here." Jan barely had time to return the chair to its place near the table and slide the hatchet under the sleeping bag when the key turned in the lock. He glanced in despair at the window, for the piece of plywood, now loose on all sides, needed only a strong jerk to remove it. A telltale line of daylight showed all around it, but it was too late to do anything about it now. He managed to slump onto the sleeping bag as the door came partially open, showing Helga's gray hair and stern features. I brought some hamburgers and milkshakes," she announced crisply, thrusting an open cardboard box over on the table. "Better eat them now, for we will be leaving soon, and there will be no food stops until tomorrow." Without raising her eyes to the window, she withdrew and closed and locked the door. As the aroma of freshly grilled hamburgers reached his nostrils, Jan rose eagerly and started for the table. "No," Jenny whispered urgently. "No, don't touch anything in that box." "Huh?" He gaped at her. "What's wrong with it?" It's all been doped. Her mind was full of it. It's easier than trying to give us hypos. And she wants to load us in a big moving van while we don't know what's going on, so I can't tell Otis. Jan, we better get out of here as fast as we can." Before his final bout with the plywood, he hurriedly braced the chair under the doorknob to delay any sudden visitors. The plywood took longer to pull off than he had counted on, but he had accomplished it finally without too much noise. Then he stared out in dismay at the totally unexpected view. He had hoped to see other houses somewhere near, or a road, or some sign of people, but there's nothing but woods. Thick, dark woods. They started directly behind the house and dropped sharply away into an impenetrable gloom of rain. Rain! He hadn't even dreamed of such a thing. Quickly, he raised the window, tugged the screen loose, and held it while he peered cautiously out. What seemed to be part of a garage was off to the right. Projecting on the left was a corner of a porch. No one was in sight. He scowled unhappily at the distance to the ground, then dropped the screen and turned to Ginny, indicating her to bring the spread that covered the cot. She had already brought it and was busy tying a knot in one corner. "If you can hang on, I'll let you down," he whispered. Sounds like the title of a country song. She nodded and scrambled to the window sill. Grasping the knot in the spread, she swung over the edge. He clung to the heavy cloth, easing it across the sill until she touched the ground. Instead of retrieving the spread, he dropped it, carefully dropped the hatchet on top of it when Ginny was out of the way, then snatched a sheet from the cot and dragged the card table to the window. After tying a corner of the sheet to one leg, he swung it over the sill, braced the table in the window, and slid downward. Halfway to the ground, his speed abruptly increased as the flimsy table leg came loose, and he landed in a heap on the pile of cloth, narrowly missing the hatchet. Even so, most of his weight came down on his right foot, and pain knifed through it as it turned under him. A short break here, as we've reached chapter 14, Elysium.
They're wrapped around your finger, marionettes on a string. Want something, give a wiggle. They come a running when you ring. You tied your knot around me, but I slipped that flimsy thing. You try your best to ground me, but I keep on taking wings. Leave me down by the river. Bring your bag and bring your stones. You want blood and not deliver. One of us will take the long way home. Under a waning moon, white as anger, black as fear, wrote my name in salt and ashes, lilac flower and a lover's tear. You cast your pain in circles, you wanna make it disappear. You want a vessel for it. Well, honey, you won't find it here. Leave me down by the river. Bring your bag and bring your stones. You want blood and not deliver. take the long way home.
Chapter 14. Elysium. For a moment, as he tried to rise, it seemed he would never make it. And in an incredible second of bad luck, they had lost their chance at freedom. At the same instant, he heard a sudden shout from the house. It seemed to come from the porch, and he realized they had been discovered already. "Run," he told Ginny. "Get into the woods! Hurry!" Instead, she caught his hand and jerked him to his feet. "Come on," she gasped. "You can do it!" He had to do it, if only for her sake, on this rocky, uneven ground, full of obstacles that her curious sight might be unable to detect. He realized she would be speedily overtaken unless he led the way and somehow found a hiding place. All in one motion, he swept up the wadded cloth cover and flung it over his shoulders. Then he seized the hatchet with one hand and her arm with the other and started for the trees. With every step, blinding pain shot through his ankle. Somehow he put the pain aside by concentrating on the chess moves ahead. He had intended the spread from the cot to give them some protection against the rain, but now the color of it suggested a better use. It had a green and brown floral pattern and ought to blend well with the low foliage around them. Why not use it as camouflage? If he could just find the right place to hide. He could hear voices somewhere behind them, but when he glanced back he could see no one because of the dense growth of trees and the patches of shrubbery. Pausing a moment behind the thick trunk of an oak, he peered hurriedly about, then drew Ginny toward a low patch of shrubs on their right. It looked like a tangle of young cedars. "Get down and crawl under them," he ordered. She slipped quickly out of sight. He followed her, then carefully drew the green and brown spread in around them so that it covered them both. He heard Helga's voice directing the search. The woods, all at once, seemed to be full of people, running, calling to each other, crashing through the underbrush. Helga's voice came nearer. He made out her hurrying footsteps as she approached the thicket. She stopped. Someone else, running slower, paused beside her, breathing heavily. "Can you see them?" "Not in this rain." It was Big Doc's voice, gasping for air. "She fooled us," Helga spat. "The little blonde witch. She's not only a telepath, she's a mind reader." "It is not the girl we must worry about," the other panted. "She is not dangerous. The boy is." "You should have known in the beginning," Helga snapped. Sorry. I keep losing East Bloc stereotype voice here. "How could I? He didn't know it himself." "You've read the book, Leopold. You knew the blood he has in him. You should have taken it into account, his potential." "I can say the same for you. You should have taken into account the girl's potential." "Oh, stop arguing with me. We have got to catch them." "We'll catch them, my dear. They cannot possibly get away. Everyone's been alerted. The rain makes it difficult, but if we miss them before dark, we'll get them in the morning." "We'd better. If they learn where they are, they'll learn nothing in the dark. We'll close in on them at daylight, and there's no way they can escape us. You know that." "If you are wrong, Kiev will have our heads. How do you intend to handle the boy?" "Gently, my dear, gently. They've all been cautioned to take the girl first. He'll do as he is told then, but if he is stubborn, we'll use gas. I would not care to face anyone of the Aragon strain when—" "Stop talking and let's get after them. Take that path, Leopold. I'll go to the right." Jan had forgotten his foot. He did not remember it when all sounds of the searchers died away and he tried to move. He decided it was better to lie still. "How do you feel?" Jenny asked worriedly. "Good enough. I'll be able to hobble when the time comes. But I think we better stay here till dark. I just hope the rain isn't too much for you." "Oh, I'm all right. Pop says it doesn't hurt you to stay soaking wet for a long time, as long as you don't get cold. I'm not cold yet. I'm just wet. And sort of hungry. I could even enjoy one of those awful cheese sandwiches." "So could I. But we better stop thinking about food till tomorrow. Right now I'm wondering which way we go when we leave here." "I'll show you. There's a path ahead, and it leads to some sort of shelter. I picked it out of Helga's mind. Only there's something very important I couldn't quite get." "What do you mean?" "About catching us in the morning. They seem to think it would be easy." "It would be easy if we were fenced in, like the other place." "Well, I sort of got the feeling that we're enclosed." "Then we must be." "Oh dear, then we've got to find the fence and somehow get to the other side of it, before daylight." "Right. We'll dig under it. Don't forget I've got the hatchet. And there didn't seem to be any outside lights around, so we'll have plenty of time to dig." He puzzled over their predicament, and added, I just wish we knew what sort of place this is. Somehow it doesn't make sense. I mean, why would there be lights and a high fence close around the big house where we were, but none here? The two places are certainly connected." "Maybe," Ginny said, "it's all part of a big estate. There are some whoppers around, even bigger than Pop's. And that big old house where we were, that's probably what they called the center. That would sort of explain the lights and the high fence and the charged wire on the top." They speculated about it while the gloom deepened into twilight. Once Jan said, "How did Big Doc learn about my being of Aragon strain? They told me about the book when I was back in the library." "That's easy. He knew who your folks were." "But my folks are dead." "Are you sure, Jan?" "Of course I'm sure. What is it?" "I almost had it. It slipped out of my mind." "It's strange, but a lot of things are coming back to you. I think touching that live wire did it. It must have opened some channels that Matilda closed." "Is it dark yet?" "Just about." "Then it ought to be safe for us to start looking for that fence. But first I ought to have a stick. I'll find a limb or something, and you can cut it for me. Then we better tear this cot cover in half. It's awfully tough, but if you start the edge with the hatchet, maybe we can tear it." "What's the idea?" "It'll give us each a half to wear. I know it's soaking wet, but we're wet too, and it'll help hold in our body heat so we won't get chilled. Then if we keep on the move..." The drizzling rain was still falling when they started in search of the fence, and the darkness was absolute. He might have been the blind one as he clung to her hand and hobbled along a half step behind her, the hatchet in his belt, while he leaned on a stick that he had been forced to cut for himself. His foot had swelled, and now every step was torture. "Pain," he suddenly remembered his father saying it that last time, "is a devilish annoyance you can sidestep. The trick is to think of something else. Something so interesting it takes up all your mind. The pain vanishes." Pain didn't vanish by any means, but the thinking helped, and he certainly had plenty to think about. He was so occupied with his curious chain of thought that he hardly noticed when they began walking on a gravel path. It was only when Ginny stopped, and then when they went up a short flight of steps to a place away from the rain, that he came out of his mental canyon. "Where are we?" Why, it's the craziest place," she exclaimed. "It's a sort of tea house? An oriental one, I mean, with cute little red and black tables and chairs and Japanese lanterns and things. What's a tea house doing out here in the middle of these thick woods? I don't know, and I don't like it. Let's get out of here. But Jan, there's a kitchen over there behind the screen, and I can see a refrigerator. I bet it's got something in it we can eat. Jan, I am starving. Then keep on starving. Let's get away from here. This place could be a trap. If they came and found us now when neither of us can move very fast. Maybe you're right, she said meekly. They've been here already, 'cause I can make out their wet footprints on the floor. That Helga may get a notion to sneak back. She tugged him around and out through the entrance and back into the rain. After a few minutes, she left the gravel path they were on and drew him into the woods. Where are you going? He asked, stumbling around blindly behind her on the uneven ground. To the fence, she said. I'm just following my nose, but if we are surrounded by a fence, we can't miss it. Anyhow, I thought we ought to get off that path. Look behind you. Far behind, vague in the rain and almost hidden by the trees, he could make out dim lights in the area of the tea house. Helga and company had returned. Gracias a Dios, he murmured. What did you say? Thanks to God. That was the way my mother always put it when she was thankful. I knew your mother was Spanish. What was her name? Teresa. And your father's was Raul. What was his last name? Riggs. No, it couldn't be. Riggs is dead. How do you know that? I can't remember. I'm sure you will. I think I see the fence ahead. How she could distinguish anything in this utter blackness was beyond him. Even when the steel mesh of the fence was inches from his nose, he would not have known it was there save by touching it. The lower edge, he was relieved to find, was not buried more than an inch or two, but when he tried to dig under it, he found the ground stony and hard, the dense clay scarcely softened by the rain. They wasted some time searching for an easier place to dig, finally came back to where they had started. Only the fear of an electrified wire prevented Jan from trying to go over the top. He had all but forgotten his foot. Their progress with the hatchet was heartbreakingly slow. Jan began to worry if they would get through by daylight. Once, while resting his tired hands, he asked, Did you tell Otis about the tea house? Tried to, Ginny panted, taking a turn with the hatchet. But I was too late. He folded up again. I was hoping Pops would know about it. I'm sure we're on somebody's estate, and Pops has been on most of the big places in this part of the country. The hole deepened and began to accumulate water in the bottom. The worst part was digging out the other side, for it meant getting down on one's knees in the muddy hole, chopping upward with the hatchet, and finally raking the debris in the form of mud with their hands. Time passed and they worked silently, mechanically, but a little more desperately, shivering now with cold and fatigue. The rain finally stopped, though Jan was not aware of it in his battle with the mud. A subtle change came over the blackness. With a sudden shock he realized he could see. Daylight, and possibly discovery, was almost upon them. I think we can squeeze under it, he said. I'll go first, then pull you through. It took some squirming, but somehow they made it, taking most of the mud with them to the other side. Here they dropped their cot-covered capes, heavy with mud, and set off as fast as they could through surprisingly park-like woods. Jan's first concern was to get as far away as possible from the danger area of the fence, and somewhere ahead, surely there would be houses, people to help them, a telephone. Ginny noticed the picket fence before he did. Too weary for speech, she pointed to it. Then he made out the neat cottage behind it, In the distance, the winding lane, with more cottages half hidden by well-tended shrubbery. At the moment, it seemed almost too good to be true. Ignoring his throbbing foot, he dropped his stick, caught Ginny's hand, and began hobbling towards the first cottage, just as if it were a changeable mirage that might suddenly vanish unless he got to it in time. It was not yet sunrise. Just as they reached the fence, two tall, elderly, and impeccably dressed gentlemen in cutaway coats and striped trousers came down the cottage steps, canes in their arms, and headed for the gate. White-haired, with long, horsey faces, they might have been diplomats on their way to an embassy meeting. At the gate they paused to put on gloves, but instantly froze, and white eyebrows climbed at the sight of their visitors, soaked through, and spattered with mud from head to toe. "I say, Roderick, old boy," drawled one, in a voice that was definitely English. "Do you see what I see?" "I'm not at all sure what you see, Brother Reginald," drawled the other. "I never am. What do you think you see?" "It is quite beyond me, quite." White eyebrows climbed higher, and eyes sharp and curious as a lizard fastened on Jan. "I say, my lad, where are you from, and what do you want?" Jan had been struggling for speech since he reached the fence, not sure whether he was in his right mind, or merely seeing double. After their ordeal in the train, everything had taken on a nightmarish quality. Ordeal in the rain, not on the train. Then he realized he was looking at twins. We just dug our way under the fence," he gasped. "If you're from the other side of the fence," interrupted the second twin, "you must return immediately. You're not allowed here. It is strictly forbidden." "Strictly," affirmed the first twin, frowning at an old-fashioned gold watch on the end of a chain. "We'd better be taking our constitutional, Roderick. We only have 20 minutes. Jan swallowed. But you don't understand. We've got to get to a telephone. No, my lad, not in Elysium. The telephones have been outlawed as an abomination. Only the Duchess." "Rank has its privileges," muttered the other twin, "but hers is strictly for official calls." "Now, Roderick." Did you say Elysium?" Ginny stammered, her hand tightening in Jan's. "I did, and I must impress upon you that this is a strictly restricted community." "Strictly restricted," affirmed the other twin. "Now, if you pardon us, we have very little time." "Please, won't you help us?" Jan burst out, exasperated. "Can't you see we need help? We were kidnapped. We escaped, and we've been in the rain all night, digging under the fence. Please, won't you at least help Ginny? Can't you see how wet and cold she is?" The two gentlemen looked at each other, bewildered. "Kidnapped?" said one. "All night in the rain? Did you hear that, Roderick?" "I heard it, Reginald. They escaped. That does form a bond. We're all escapees from an impossible world. We'd better get Jeter. He'll know what to do." "Jeter isn't here, Roderick. Don't you remember? You sent him over to the club with that beastly dish of bloaters. You would eat bloaters for breakfast." In their bewilderment, their hands fluttered helplessly. It suddenly came to Jan that this elegant but elderly pair, notwithstanding their lizard-bright eyes, were not entirely competent, and their arrival of Ginny and himself had thrown them completely off their accustomed orbit. Then he heard Ginny, shivering at his side, give a frightened gasp. "Oh, Lordy," she whispered, "there's the white van." A quick turn of his head, and he glimpsed the white van, far down by the last cottage, just turning onto the lane. His hand tightened on Ginny's, and on the instant he thrust open the gate and drew her into the yard beside the bewildered twins. He did not even question whether or not it was the same white van that had come to haunt him. He knew by the coldness nodding within him that it was, and that Helga was probably at the wheel. "If you can't help us," he cried, "at least can you hide us in this house somewhere? The people in that van, they're after us." Without waiting to see the reaction of the Englishman would be, he ran for the steps, pulling Ginny with him. As he burst into the cottage, he prayed that the shrubbery crowding the yard had hidden them from anyone down the lane. Inside with Ginny, he started to close the door, but the twins were already hurrying up the steps. "I say," said one entering, "we do want to help, really. Beastly thing being kidnapped and having to dig in the rain all night." "Utterly beastly," echoed his brother. "So we'll do what we can, time permitting. We'll give up our constitutional to help. But breakfast at the club with the Duchess is another matter. We must be there on the dot." "On the dot," said his twin, glancing at his watch. "It takes but 2 minutes to walk to the club. That gives us 16 minutes. 15 minutes, Roddy, old boy," corrected the other, glancing at an identical watch. "You always were a bit slow. That's why I inherited the title, being born 3 minutes ahead of you." Permit me to introduce myself," he said, turning. "I am Sir Reginald Weems, Bart. And this is my brother, Sir Roderick Weems, a mere knight. By the way, how did you earn your knighthood, Roddy? It slips my mind." "Slips my mind, too, at the moment," said Sir Roderick. "But it was at something utterly dashing I did. I was always nipping about, doing utterly dashing things in those days. But time is passing. If we would help our young visitors... By the way, do you have names?" I'm Jan, sir. She's Ginny Rhodes." "Only 14 minutes now," Sir Reginald reminded them, still holding his watch. "What can we do for you in 14 minutes, my friends?" Jan rubbed his eyes and looked from one brother to another. He had the curious feeling that reality had departed, and that he and Ginny were trapped in some netherworld from which there was no hope of escape. "Before you go," he stammered, "could you give us something to eat? We're pretty beat, and we haven't had a bite since yesterday morning." Again that look of helplessness came over the long, horsey faces of the Weems brothers. "Dear me," said Roderick, "if only Jeter were here." "Jeter isn't here," Sir Reginald reminded him. "What are we to do?" There was a moment of pained silence, then a great light seemed to dawn in Sir Reginald's eyes. His long face lit up, and he smiled. "I say, Rodney, I've had a ripping idea. Perfectly ripping. Why don't we take our friends to breakfast with us? Do you suppose her Grace would mind? Really, I think she'd be amazed." Sir Roderick looked scandalized. "But look at them! They're hardly presentable." "Oh, dash it all, a bit of water and some of Jeter's uniforms should do the trick." "Of course, he is quite small, and those old navy things ought to be just right. I'll get them and you show them to the baths." "Right-o, but we'll have to hurry," said Sir Reginald, who was still holding his watch. "No time for showers and primping. Just wipe off the worst and into your togs." Jan's feeling of unreality grew as he stripped off his sodden jeans in one of the bathrooms and splashed water on his face. None of this made any sense, least of all the impeccable Weems brothers. What strange sort of place was Elysium, where a duchess invited friends to a formal breakfast this early in the morning? His fresh clothing, a middy blouse and a pair of bell-bottom trousers of a generation ago, fitted him well enough. He had just finished dressing when there came a tap on the door, and Sir Reginald said, "Time's up, my lad. Punctuality is the mark of breeding, so we must be on our way." Jan hurried into the living room, overcrowded with old furniture and glass cases of butterflies. Ginny, in 2 long trousers rolled up to her ankles, was already there. As he entered, she put a finger to her lips and pointed to a window. He peered through the curtains, and his heart contracted. The white van and Jenna's station wagon, filled with Big Doc's white-coated helpers, were coming to a stop in the lane. Let's take a few minutes here. Sorry, just saw the microphone. That's frustrating. Also, looks like I'm out of time. So I will have to look. I want to verify when that was finished. And I will pick this up, closing on this at another time here. Sorry about that. But thanks for tagging along. And till next time.